My brother betrayed me with my wife, then sued me for our parents' inheritance, but he didn't expect my ex and me to expose his lies in court. I'm 34, male, and until recently I thought I had my life together. A decent job, a comfortable house, and what I thought was a happy marriage. My wife, M, and I have been together for 8 years. We met in college and clicked almost immediately. I thought we were the couple everyone envied. But lately I've been questioning everything I knew about my life. Let me start by saying I have a younger brother, D. He's 31 and we've never been close. Growing up he was always the favorite. Our parents doted on him while I was the responsible one. He got away with everything, lying, cheating, stealing, and somehow he always wormed his way back into everyone's good graces. I guess you could call him charming. But underneath he's manipulative, entitled, always thinking the world owes him something. D's trouble really kicked off after high school. He started hanging with the wrong crowd, got into drugs, petty crime, and somehow every time my parents would bail him out, literally and figuratively. Meanwhile I was busting my ass working 2 jobs through college and barely hearing a word of encouragement from them. I didn't mind it too much back then. I figured D was their problem, not mine. That all changed 2 years ago. It started small, like most betrayals do. Little things I began to notice with M. She'd come home late from work and her explanations were flimsy. She'd spend more time on her phone, texting someone late into the night. When I asked who, she'd brush it off, say it was work-related. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt, of hiding something. I didn't want to jump to conclusions though. We'd been together for so long. I trusted her. I trusted us. Then I started hearing things from mutual friends. Whispers about M and D. I thought it was ridiculous at first. Who does that? Cheats with their brother-in-law. But the signs kept piling up. There was one night, a night that's burned into my memory. We were at a family gathering at my parents' house. I stepped outside for some air and found M and D huddled together, too close, too familiar. When they noticed me, they jumped apart like guilty kids caught stealing candy. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't confront them. I didn't have proof. I was afraid. Things escalated fast after that. M's behavior got more erratic and I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was unraveling right in front of me. I finally broke down and checked her phone while she was in the shower. I know, invading privacy and all that, but I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. And there it was. Messages between M and D, explicit ones. Plans. Meetings. Everything. They had been having an affair for over a year. I'll never forget the way my stomach dropped, the way my hands shook as I scrolled through the endless thread of betrayal. It wasn't just the sex, though that was bad enough. It was the way they talked about me. Like I was some idiot, some obstacle in the way of their fun. My own brother. My wife. Treating me like a joke. I confronted M that night. She denied it at first, of course. Screamed at me for violating her privacy. Turned it around like I was the bad guy. But when I showed her the messages, she crumbled. She cried, begged for forgiveness, said it was a mistake. But you don't make that kind of mistake for over a year. You don't make that mistake with your husband's brother. I kicked her out. D was next. I stormed into my parents' house, rage burning through every nerve in my body. I wanted to hear it from him. From his slimy, lying mouth. He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. He sat there, smirking, as if this was some kind of twisted game. It just happened, man, he said. Like that made it better. Like my entire life wasn't shattered. I went no contact with both of them after that. My wife. My brother. Two people who were supposed to love me, who destroyed everything without a second thought. My parents, though. They didn't disown Dee. Not immediately. They coddled him, as always. Said it was a mistake. That family is family. They wanted me to forgive him. I told them I was done. For a while, it seemed like that was the end of it. I started the process of divorcing M, started putting my life back together, one painful piece at a time. Then, a year after the affair blew up, I got the news. M was pregnant. With Dee's child. I was at work when I got the call. It was my mom. Her voice trembling. Your brother's in trouble, she said. He needs your help. I didn't care. Not my problem anymore. But she kept talking. She told me that M was pregnant and that Dee being Dee had bailed. He wasn't ready for fatherhood. He wasn't ready for the responsibility. He'd run off to some other state, leaving M alone and pregnant. My parents were devastated. They had finally cut him off financially after years of supporting his messes. And now he was on the run. And here's the kicker. My parents had recently passed away. Both in a tragic car accident about 6 months ago, and left me their entire $2 million estate. They hadn't left Dee a cent. Not after everything he had done. It was all mine. And now, out of the blue, Dee was crawling back. He was desperate. I'm going to be a dad, he said in a voicemail. I need your help, man. I screwed up. I know I did. But I need you. The sheer audacity of it made me laugh. He screws me over. Destroys my marriage. Gets my wife pregnant. And now he wants my help. I ignored him. But he kept calling. Kept begging. Then M called. She told me she was keeping the baby. Said Dee was a mess but she needed support. Said she didn't know what to do. But she didn't want to do it alone. I hung up. I didn't care. But the calls kept coming. From both of them. Messages filled with apologies, excuses, justifications. Every pathetic attempt at making me feel bad for them. They painted themselves as victims. Like they hadn't both ruined my life. I wanted to ignore them forever. But something kept gnawing at me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to be involved in their lives ever again. But they were relentless. Then one day, Dee showed up at my door. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. Unshaven. Gaunt. Eyes sunken. I messed up, he said, barely above a whisper. I don't know how to fix it. I need your help, man. I wanted to slam the door in his face. Every part of me screamed to do it. But there was something in his voice. Some part of me that remembered him as the kid who used to follow me around the backyard. Asking a million questions. Looking up to me. Some part of me that remembered when we were just brothers. Before everything went wrong. I let him in. We talked. Or rather, he talked. He rambled on about how he was scared. How M was blaming him for everything. How he couldn't handle the pressure. I sat there, silent. listening to him try to justify the unjustifiable. My mind kept flashing back to those texts. To the way they laughed behind my back. The way they treated me like a fool. But here he was. Broken. Pathetic. He asked me for money. Said he was going to be a dad soon. And needed to get his life together. Said he wanted to make things right. I told him no. He begged. He actually got down on his knees, hands clasped. Like some desperate beggar in a bad movie. Please, man. I can't do this without you. I told him no again. But this time, I added something. Something I never thought I'd say out loud. You're on your own, Dee. You made this mess. You fix it. He stared at me for a long time. His eyes wide. Like he couldn't believe it. Like he expected me to bail him out. Just like our parents always had. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not after everything he'd done. I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. Get out, I said. And don't come back. He didn't say anything. Just stood there, his mouth open, eyes glassy. Then he left. And that was the last time I saw him. Em gave birth a few months later. I heard through mutual friends that she's doing okay. Raising the baby on her own. Dee's nowhere to be found. Still running from his responsibilities like he always has. And me? I've moved on. Or at least, I'm trying to. The $2 million inheritance? I kept every cent. I've invested some. Donated a bit to charity. And used a chunk to finally take that trip to Europe I'd always dreamed about. It's strange, having all this money. It doesn't change the fact that my life's been torn apart. But at least now, I can breathe. I've cut ties with Dee, moved on from Em. And finally started piecing together the life I deserve. Or at least, I thought I had. Then came the lawsuit. A letter arrived one afternoon. I remember it so clearly because I'd just come back from my first real vacation in years. A 2-week solo trip through Italy. Something I'd wanted to do for as long as I could remember. I was in a good place. I felt free. But that letter. Dee was suing me for stealing his part of the inheritance. He claimed our parents had intended to split everything equally between us. And that I had manipulated them into cutting him out when I wrote. I knew that I read it. The idea that I'd manipulated anyone, let alone our parents, who had spent their entire lives coddling Dee, was beyond absurd. But as ridiculous as it sounded, the lawsuit was real. And it didn't stop there. Dee started calling up every relative he could find. I'd been distant from most of our extended family for years. While Dee had always been the charmer. He played the victim card hard. Crying on the phone. Telling everyone how I'd tricked our dying parents. Leaving him with nothing while I lived like a king. Slowly but surely, he started turning them against me. I wasn't surprised when a few cousins or distant aunts took his side. They'd always seen him as the fun, lovable younger brother. And me as the serious, uptight older one. What shocked me was when some of the closer relatives, people I thought knew better, started buying into his lies. Your brother's desperate, they'd say. You have more than enough. Why not just share it with him? He's your blood. They made me sound like the villain. The one hoarding money while Dee was struggling to get by. I'll admit, it got to me. Even though I knew the truth, the constant calls, texts, and messages from relatives wore me down. I was being painted as the bad guy in my own story. And the worst part? Dee was feeding them all lies. He said our parents had promised him half the inheritance. Said I had threatened to cut them off if they didn't leave everything to me. He even claimed that I'd taken advantage of their grief after he went through a rough patch. A rough patch? The man ruined my marriage, got my wife pregnant, abandoned her and the kid, and now had the nerve to claim I was taking advantage? The lawsuit started dragging on. Dee pulled every dirty trick he could think of. He manipulated records, tried to twist family conversations, even produced some fabricated emails that looked like they were from our parents, promising him a share of the estate. My lawyer, thankfully, saw through most of it. But it still wasn't enough to make the case disappear. Dee wasn't going to give up. Meanwhile, or rather, Dee's ex now, was raising their child alone. I hadn't spoken to her since she gave birth. To be honest, I never thought I would again. But fate, as it seems, has a twisted sense of humor. One day, out of nowhere, I got a call from M. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice cold, almost businesslike. "It's important." I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. When I arrived, she was already seated, looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she held her coffee cup. She didn't waste time on small talk. "I know what Dee's doing," she said. "The lawsuit, the lies. He's desperate, and he's dragging you through hell because he thinks he deserves a piece of that inheritance." I stared at her, unsure of where this was going. "Why are you telling me this?" She took a deep breath. "Because he's manipulating everyone, including me. And I'm done with it." I raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" Em looked down, tapping her fingers against the table. "It means I want out. Out of his games, his lies, everything. Dee doesn't care about anyone but himself. He left me with a child to raise while he's off trying to win a case he knows he can't. He's not gonna stop until he drags everyone down with him." There was a pause as her words hung in the air. Then she leaned forward, her voice lowering. "But what if I told you? I could help you win." My heart skipped a beat. "Help me how?" "I'm still married to him. Legally. Which means I know things. Things that could destroy his case. Documents. Conversations. The truth about what happened with your parents. All of it." I didn't say anything for a long time. This was the last thing I expected. I'd spent the better part of 2 years hating Em, blaming her for everything that went wrong in my life. And now, here she was, offering me a way to end the nightmare Dee had dragged me into. "Why now?" I finally asked. "Because I'm tired," she said, her voice cracking. "Tired of him. Tired of fighting. I just want what's best for my child, and Dee is never going to be that. He's never going to be the father she needs. He's a manipulative, selfish man who uses people until they have nothing left. And I won't let him do that to me, or to you, anymore." For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something in Em I hadn't seen before. Not remorse, exactly. But clarity. Like she'd finally realized the depth of what Dee had done to all of us. "Okay," I said slowly. "I'm listening." Over the next few weeks, Em and I worked together, quietly gathering evidence that would sink Dee's case. She handed over documents, texts, and financial records that showed Dee's reckless spending, his abandonment of her and their child, and his ongoing attempts to manipulate both our parents and me. She even had recordings of conversations where Dee bragged about how easy it was to play the victim, to make people feel sorry for him. It was damning. By the time the court date arrived, I was nervous, but cautiously optimistic. Dee had no idea what was coming. He strutted into the courtroom like he was about to win the lottery, flashing smug smiles at our relatives sitting in the audience, many of whom had come to support him, still convinced I was the villain. The first part of the trial was what I expected. Dee's lawyer rehashed the same tired arguments about how I'd stolen his inheritance, how he'd been unfairly cut out, how our parents had meant for him to get his fair share. But when it was our turn to present the evidence, things shifted. Em took the stand. The moment she began speaking, Dee's smug expression faltered. She told the court everything. How Dee had abandoned her during the pregnancy, how he'd manipulated everyone around him, how he'd lied and twisted the truth to get what he wanted. She backed it up with proof, texts, financial records, recordings. The entire room went silent as she laid it all out, piece by piece, until Dee's entire case unraveled right before his eyes. I watched as Dee's face turned pale, his confidence draining away with every word Em said. He tried to interrupt, tried to argue, but the evidence was too strong. He had nothing left. When it was over, the judge ruled in my favor. Dee's lawsuit was thrown out, and he was ordered to pay my legal fees. He slumped in his chair, defeated, as the court cleared out. Our relatives, the ones who had sided with him, avoided my gaze as they hurried out the door, embarrassed and ashamed. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Dee had done this to himself. After the trial, I met Em outside the courthouse. She looked relieved but tired. "Thank you," I said genuinely. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect you to help." She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for my daughter. She deserves better than Dee. We both do." I nodded, understanding, and with that, we parted ways. Dee disappeared after the trial. I heard rumors that he'd left town, moved somewhere far away to avoid the embarrassment. He burned every bridge he had, even with the relatives who had stood by him. As for me, I finally had peace. Real peace. I was free. If you're still reading this, thanks for sticking around. And hey, maybe don't trust your brother with your wife. Just saying. Feel free to subscribe if you want to hear more about how crazy life can get.